the source of our understanding of what Congress is and the basis for all legal power that the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate has comes from Article 1 of the United States Constitution, an article we've already covered in some detail. I just want to remind you that these rights do not spring like Athena out of the forehead of Zeus. They are a result of legislative action and decision making. In this case, all laws are based on the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution's first article deals with the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, the U.S. Congress. Now, one of the basic questions about congressional representation is what kind of people are we electing? It's actually, what role are the people who we are electing expected to play? One way of looking at this is the delegate model. I believe, I'm making this up, I actually don't believe this, but if I believe in the delegate model, believe that I am electing a representative to represent the majority opinion within that district on every major issue. I expect the congressman, whoever they may be, to make darn sure that they are routinely canvassing voters in order to find out what they think on a variety of issues, so that when it comes time for them to vote on these issues, they're not just reflecting their own personal beliefs. They are there as delegates of, they have been delegated by the people of that district to speak for them on all issues. So in this case, the delegate model says that the congressman is merely a function of the popular will, and that they should have no mind of their own other than what the people who elected them give them in terms of ideas and preferences and so forth. The other approach is you are electing a custodian, a guardian. You are electing someone who you think is wise and who you think is responsible and who you think is ready for the challenge of deciding wisely in our name, in our interests. And that does not mean slavishly finding out which way the popular wind is blowing on every issue. Instead, what a custodian or a guardian of the people's trust is a person who thinks deeply about the decisions that are before them. Because their job is to make these decisions, they will have the time, the focus, and the resources to explore the consequences of each, whatever outcome, whatever possible decision they could make, and then use their best judgment to come up with the optimal solution. If you are electing a delegate of the popular will, if they do something that violates that popular will, it's going to be a cause of controversy and frustration. But if you are electing a trustworthy person to be there and speak in your name, not necessarily what you think on every little issue, but you've put somebody there who can speak for you, who you respect as wise, who you trust to be loyal, and who you count on to be strong. You want somebody who will do what they think is right, not what you necessarily might believe is right. Now, that second one is harder to explain to people because it sounds like you're electing a dictator. No. What you're doing is you're electing someone who you trust to be your leader because you don't have the time, chances are, or the resources to Explore the nuances of the proposals before you, the text of and implication of all of the various words in the actual piece of law that's being considered. You don't necessarily know people who know the history of these things, who understand other countries and their justice, who understand what a balanced justice system, or what a balanced legal system, or what a balanced economic system, political or military system might be. So you're trusting someone to speak in your interests, who's from your area, who knows you, who you trust because of who they are. So that is a tension, because I'll tell you something. No representative is purely one or the other of these. If you had a representative that was nothing more than a rubber stamp for the people of that area, they would become the prisoner of whatever pollsters they used to determine public opinion. And they could be easily manipulated by those pollsters or by somebody creating a false sense of opinion. Or worse, they could be stampeded by a panic. No. Nor is a smart representative going to come up to the people and say, hey, I don't really care what you think. You're a bunch of yutzes. You're electing me to be the non-yutz among you, a person who's capable of thinking deeply and clearly, and I'm so much better at it than you are. A person who did that would probably never get elected in the first place, but if they did, they would quickly lose office. You need to do a little of both. You need to pay attention to the popular will and serve it when you can. But on those matters of conviction, or where you just don't see the wisdom in the popular will, at that point you've got to go against the popular will because it's the right thing to do. And it takes a courageous congressman to do that. Now, one of the things I didn't cover when we were covering the various historical precedents to the U.S. Congress is their nemesis or their partner. For example, the Athenian General Assembly had as its nemesis demagogues. Demagogues are people who pretend to be able to give the people what they want without consequence or penalty. They lie to the people and tell them pretty stories in return for the people's gullible trust, and then they abuse that trust in order to accrue more money and power for themselves. Unfortunately, the Athenian system allowed for demagogues again and again to trick the people and get away with it. In the case of the Roman Republic, you had a senatorial system that became mired in factions, and the factional infighting between the populares, who represented the common people, and the optimates, who represented the leading people, ended up becoming so great that the only thing that could make Rome function was a dictator coming in, or the wealthy leader of an army who ends up buying his own armies. And then these guys end up taking the place of the Senate, turning the Senate into a bunch of yes men and becoming that thing called an emperor. The threat of an executive taking over was both the bane of Athens' democracy and even of Rome's Senate. In the case of the English Parliament, there was a moment in the early 1600s where the king, as you may recall, was saying, "We are like unto gods." Well, King James I and Charles I of the House of Stuart were not at all interested in trying to appeal to the popular will. As a result, when Parliament was called, it refused to do business with the king until the king gave them a bunch of concessions, and the king refused, and it ended up provoking a series of English civil wars in the middle 1600s. So, the king, the chief executive of England, is out of harmony with Parliament, and things get so bad that they fight a civil war, and the king ends up having his head separated from the rest of his body at the order of several regicides, king killers, in Parliament. The Parliament is then in charge of England. Now, one of the men who made Parliament's victory in the Civil Wars possible is a guy named Oliver Cromwell, who came up with and led the so-called New Model Army, the most disciplined troops in the English Civil War period. When the Parliament beats the king and beheads the king and rules England, there are a series of scandals. Now, Cromwell goes into semi-seclusion after a while, but these scandals indicate that the people in Parliament who now run England could care less about England, and they want what's theirs. They want to serve their district at the expense of the common good. They want to serve their wealth at the expense of the public treasure. They're acting like parasites, not like leaders. So ultimately, Cromwell calls the parliamentarians who refused to go to the people and get voted back into office or face electoral challenge a bunch of parasites. Cromwell was really good at cursing people out, and he used that on the parliament. The parliamentarians, by not stepping up and being leaders, ultimately served the worst impulses that each of them had. And this is again, the anonymity of the herd allows people to be less than what they should be. And so we in this country even have a problem in the Articles of Confederation period because there isn't a strong leader. There isn't somebody for the Congress to play off of. And so the Continental Congress again and again makes these genuinely short-sighted and unwise decisions because what can you expect? It's Congress. So our system balances off a strong executive and a strong judicial branch against the tendencies of parliaments and legislatures, Congresses to sort of pass the buck. The president says the buck stops here, and the courts say whether the buck is constitutional or not.